And whilst Keir Starmer's approval ratings are lukewarm, Rishi Sunak's are deeply underwater and have gotten worse during the campaign. And the parallel to look at is that actually Boris Johnson wasn't that popular in 2019. His approvals were fairly mediocre, but he was far ahead of Jeremy Corbyn. And so I think that's what we're seeing playing out. There may not be much enthusiasm for Labour or the Labour leader, but it is far higher, or at least there isn't the anger that we see towards the Conservatives. And that's enough to eke out not just a win, but if either our model or YouGov's are correct, quite a big win for Labour.
Think of a number. No, I'm not playing party games. It is what almost everyone's doing when it comes to trying to foresee the outcome of this general election. The problem for the Conservatives is every guess now, in public and in private, seems to be about how badly they're going to lose when the polls are counted on the 4th of July. The pollsters, the pundits, and most extraordinarily, Conservative cabinet ministers, who now include David T.C. Davis, who told The Sun's Never Mind the Ballots YouTube programme out loud that he expected a Labour landslide victory. He just didn't know yet how big a landslide.
I don't know how large that will be, but I'm not stupid either. You cannot dismiss every single opinion poll.
Well, it makes it harder, you'd imagine, for Rishi Sunak to proclaim today's drop in inflation to 2% as great news, evidence that the government's plan is working. We've got 15 days before the general election, and those pollsters' predictions keep on coming in. We've had one from MRP, mentioned that an MRP poll from More in Common. Now there's another one in from YouGov as I speak, and our political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald is here with that. Welcome back to the studio, Alicia. So this latest poll, can you tell us?
Yeah, so I'll give you the rundown of the seat predictions first. And again, another damning poll for the Conservatives, dare I say it again on this show. 425 seats to the Labour Party, huge. 108 to the Conservatives, 67 to the Liberal Democrats, 20 to the SNP, 2 for the Greens, and 5 for Reform UK. So again, you can just see this pattern of that massive chasm between the Conservative Party seats and the Labour Party.
Goodness me, a 200-seat majority, as it were. I say a prediction. It's where we stand at the moment according to their numbers, but it is a projection, a 200-seat majority for Labour, which would be the biggest win by any party in a century.
It would. And also some of the really interesting details in this poll is about who in the Conservative Party would actually are set to lose their seats. So we've heard from various polls that some big beasts in the Conservative Party are set to potentially lose their seats, including people like Jeremy Hunt. But this poll actually says that Rishi Sunak himself could also lose his seats, which would make him the first sitting Prime Minister to ever lose his seat. So that is a very, very significant. I think what's also really interesting with this YouGov poll is that it shows a further decline in the Conservative Party's electoral fortunes, let's say. Since their last poll just a fortnight ago, they've lost a further 32 seats in just a fortnight. So interesting to see whether that is mainly to do with announcements they've made in this election campaign, or maybe if it's more to do with more people making their mind up just as the campaign has kind of gone a bit further down the line.
So, but the reason there for Labour's faces to be absolutely covered in smiles, although talk to Liz Kendall, doesn't matter who you talk to there in any interview, they'll say they're not taking anything for granted. Now, what about Reform putting the squeeze on from the other side on the Tory party? Where are we with that after these polls?
Yeah, so let's look back at the poll that we spoke about in the last hour. That was a poll from More in Common, and they actually didn't predict that Reform UK would get any seats, but that they'd still take up quite a big chunk of the vote share. The YouGov poll, however, says that Reform are on track to take 5 seats, including Richard Holden, the former Conservative Party chairman's seat. And we'll remember just, I think maybe even last week, a couple of weeks ago, Richard Holden, he got put into a safe seat, Basildon and Billericay in Essex. And that was slightly controversial, as it meant that he kind of had moved from a Durham seat all the way to the southeast into a safe seat. But that's predicted to potentially be lost to Reform UK as well in this poll. So very interesting.
Oh, my word. OK, stay with us, Alicia, because I want to now consult Luke Trill, who is director of More in Common, the pollster. Luke, welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon.
We've got a lot here, haven't we? My word, a lot to chew over. We had your company, your pollsters' numbers a little bit earlier on. Now we've got YouGov. What do you make of it all? There's a variation, obviously, between these these two sets of figures, which has a lot to do with, well, they would be. The methodology is slightly different. They're both very big samples. They're still, both of them, absolutely bleak if you happen to be a Conservative.
Absolutely. Whilst the two models differ on the overall seat totals, two things are consistent. One, they would be historically bad results for the Conservatives. But secondly, and I think this is almost more important, the trend in both of them is the Conservatives losing more seats than when the first MRPs came out from More in Common and YouGov just a few weeks ago. So thought that during the campaign, the Conservatives might be clawing some of those seats back. If anything, it has gotten worse for the Conservatives.
Right. And when you drill down into the data, is there more of by way of a clue as to why this thing is moving the way that it is?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of factors. One of them, quite clearly, is that there was some assumption that those people who said that they voted Conservative in 2019, but now didn't know how they'd vote, it was an assumption they would come back to the Conservatives. In lots of models, there was an assumption that they might come back to the Conservatives. Clearly, that hasn't happened.
Yes.
But what's interesting is, again, when you chat to people around the country, and we've spent the past few days on the road in some of the seats that are projected to flip, it's really interesting. There is really a sense, not just that, people are cross with the Conservatives in government, but they've had a bad campaign. And I think that has stopped some of these waverers coming back to this sense that, I was chatting to people just yesterday who said, I thought I was ultimately going to vote Conservative, but then D-Day happened and I couldn't go back. So I think it's a mixture of these fundamentals, but also just the nature of the election campaign we've seen.
And what about the main two party leaders? Whenever you talk to a senior Conservative, they say, look, the polls look bad at the moment. We will wait and see what happens on polling day. People, though, are not in love with Labour. They're not convinced by them. Just take that point aboard and set it against what we know people are saying they think about those two.
Yeah, absolutely. Neither of the two party leaders is particularly loved by the public. There isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer and Labour. But of course, we know in politics, you just have to be ahead of your opponent. And whilst Keir Starmer's approval ratings are lukewarm, Rishi Sunak's are deeply underwater and have gotten worse during the campaign. And the parallel to look at is that actually Boris Johnson wasn't that popular in 2019. His approvals were fairly mediocre, but he was far ahead of Jeremy Corbyn. And so I think that's what we're seeing playing out. There may not be much enthusiasm for Labour or the Labour leader, but it is far higher, or at least there isn't the anger that we see towards the Conservatives. And that's enough to eke out not just a win, but if either our model or YouGov's are correct, quite a big win for Labour.
And we all remember the way that that Boris Johnson and Theresa May before that, they faced challenges from UKIP, the Brexit Party, which is now in a new incarnation, if you like, reform. And those previous two leaders managed to kind of grind that down. Rishi Sunak has not managed to do that. Is there a single reason for that?
Well, I think the main reason is that the Conservatives' poll rating is so low. So if you looked at where David Cameron was when he was taking on UKIP, yes, the Conservatives weren't that popular between 2010 and 2015, but they were still in the 30s. People still favoured them over Labour. Similarly with Theresa May, despite the mistakes in that snap election, remained at sort of 42%. So I think when the Conservatives are in the ascendancy, it's easier for them to squeeze a party of the populist right.
Yes.
But the problem is now, and we know one of the key messages the Conservatives are trying to get across is, if you vote for reform, it's a vote for Labour. Lots of people are so cross with the Conservatives that actually, people who are voting for reform see them both as bad options. So why would they worry about Labour getting in? So I think it's that combination. It's the Conservatives are in a much worse position than they were previously, but also for many Reform UK supporters, they don't want Labour, but they don't see it as particularly worse than the Conservatives.
Right. Now, we're now seeing one cabinet minister, Luke, and then another saying, look, yeah, it looks like a big defeat is on the cards, but then adding, look, we'll see what happens on the night. it looks to me as if they're maybe hoping they will scare some of those Tory defectors back into their camp. The idea of a big Labour majority might persuade some Tories to stay loyal and limit the scale of the defeat. If there's any logic to this, it's got to be that. Is there any sign that if that's the plan, that it's working with anyone?
Well, it's interesting that you raised that, John, because we were speaking to groups this week as well who should be loyal Conservative voters. They weren't swing voters by any means, but they were disgruntled, they were cross, they were thinking about not voting. But what was interesting was when I said to them, and this was a group that we did in Whitby, what might make you come out? It was this idea that Labour was going to get a really big majority. They would say things like, having a total whitewash wouldn't be a good thing. No. I'm worried about a landslide. So whilst I don't think that message will work on swing voters, it's not going to pull people back from Labour to the Conservatives. I think there is a group of disgruntled Conservatives who might just think, I'm really worried about Labour getting in with such a big majority. I'm going to hold my nose, go out and vote Tory, even if I'm not that enthusiastic about them.
Right, they would have to hope at least for that. Lutra, do stay with us. Alicia Fitzgerald still here with us. I mean, I was mentioning earlier on the cabinet minister David T.C. Davis saying, he's not stupid. He can see the polls. Looks like a big Labour win. Not sure quite how big. It is a gobsmacking thing for a cabinet minister to say mid-campaign. You can imagine them thinking it, easily imagine them thinking it, maybe saying it in private, maybe even saying it really privately to the likes of you and me. But to air it that way in public, you wonder what the effect is on their campaigners, because, I don't know, I mean, these cabinet ministers, let alone the campaigners, they must struggle, they must keep the morale up to get out of bed in the morning.
I mean, yeah, you're right. It's really quite astounding that he was quite so forthright in saying that. But it isn't a massive shock. If you look at the way that Rishi Sunak has handled this campaign, I feel that very few cabinet ministers have come forward and said, no, we're going to win. This is ours. This is ours for the taking. Lots of them have been very keen to say, a vote for reform is a vote for Labour. A vote for any party that isn't the Conservative Party will just ease Keir Starmer into number 10. So it's been very clear that the way that they've approached this campaign is to say, look, we know we're the underdog. We know we're not coming first in the polls, but we still have a shot. We still can get a big chunk of that vote share, rather than saying that they're going to walk into number 10.
That's not what T.C. Davis is doing. It's not what Grant Shapps is doing. There's a distance between saying, look, we're going to fight on, we can still make ground here, nobody's voted yet, and saying we're toast, which is pretty much what we're hearing now. On Labour, Alicia, and tax. The leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, fact is he can't and he won't shake off that suspicion that Labour would put up taxes if they get into office.
Well, the Conservatives have made the conversation very much about Labour and increasing taxes. It's been very clear that Rishi Sunak wants to reiterate that the Conservatives are still the party of lower taxes, because for so long that is effectively what they were. Many people in the public will have said that a Labour government means higher taxes, a Conservative government means lower taxes. However, obviously, we're seeing the highest tax burden in decades and people generally feeling a lot worse off. So I think that argument has been a bit touch and go until recently. The trouble with what the Labour Party have to grapple with at the moment is, on the one hand, they're trying to say to the public that they are fiscally responsible. They're trying to say they're the party of business. They're the party that are going to be sensible with the public purse and not just spend and increase taxes and make people better off. But Keir Starmer has to be careful, because if he promises not to ever increase taxes for the whole time that he is the Prime Minister, if he does win this election, then he's boxed himself in. He'll make that really, really difficult, because, of course, we don't know what the economic backdrop in the UK will be in a few years' time. Many variables can change. And we've seen that in the past 5 years, for example. So many unprecedented events can happen. So he's trying to toe a really careful line of saying, the public can trust me, I won't increase taxes, but he doesn't want to say it too much, because he knows that if that changes, then that will bite him.
Yeah, he got into a bit of a tangle when he tried to define what he sees as working people who wouldn't be hit by tax increases, and he's trying to sort of come back on that now. I see out in the road, Alicia, he's saying his definition of working people who need not fear being hit by extra taxes, he says that does in fact include people who save for a car or a mortgage. But his last form of words in that conversation on LBC yesterday, it sort of left that open and made him a bit of an open target on that front.
Definitely. And he's struggled to define what a working person is for actually quite some time. And I think that's because in general, the idea of a working person has changed in the UK. We don't have the kind of typical working class, middle class definitions that we maybe did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And he's really trying to grapple with that. He keeps saying the Labour Party are the party for working people. But the Conservatives are also saying that. They're saying, you know, we need more people working, and you get rewarded for your hard work. So there's been a bit of an overlap there on what the two parties are really trying to do.
Yeah.
But this is something that Keir Starmer keeps bumping into a lot, not just during this campaign, but prior to that as well, and something that the public want to hear a clear definition of him.
All right, Alicia, thanks. Let's go back finally just to Luke Trill. I mean, Luke, these polls, we've heard them now. We've heard the latest two big polls here today. Both of those polls suggest there are a lot of seats which can't be called at this point, even on such a big polling sample. How much is there still to play for? Fact is, of course, there's still 2 weeks of campaigning to go. In one sense, there's a lot to play for. But these polls, how much do they leave open, still up for grabs?
Oh, a significant number of seats are still up for grabs. And I think particularly for the type of opposition that the Conservatives are able to muster, that still, I think, hangs in the balance if you look at these. So if you look at our MRP, we could have the Conservatives, if they won all of the seats, which are marginal and in the balance, it could be just over 200. If they lost them all, they could be down at 100 or even lower than that. And that is a big difference when it comes to sort of rebuilding the Conservative Party and also thinking about who might lead it in the future, what they might do with reform going forward. So whilst, you know, we might suspect based on the current polls that we might have a good guess of who is going to be the next Prime Minister, the shape of the next Parliament very much hangs in the balance and will be determined over the course of the final 2 weeks of the campaign.
All right, Luke, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you, Luke Trill there from the Polestar in Common. Just need to read you out the candidates list for the constituency of Basildon and Billericay, which we mentioned. We have Christopher David Bateman running for the British Democratic Party, Stephen Conley for Reform, Stuart Goshawk is running for the Greens, Alex Harrison for the Labour Party, Richard Holden for the Conservative and Unionist Party, Dave Murray, Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, and Edward Krishnan Sainsbury, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate.